People feeding monkeys, it can come from a really good and beautiful place that I can understand entirely, but there's just a lot of misunderstanding. This little baby is the cheeky ass one who will try and slap you if you get too close. The easiest thing generally to do is to back away. In 2014, about 48% of primates were endangered, and in 2021, it rose to 75%.
Welcome to Travel Devil. I'm your host Clara Francken, and in a world full of mass tourism, we're here to talk about unconventional travel. Let's get into it.
Today we're talking about how to handle interactions with monkeys and apes in Southeast Asia. Can we feed them? What do we do if one becomes aggressive? How should we interact with them? I don't know, but we shall find out today. Today's guest is Connie Needham. She's an expert on wildlife education. She started working in animal and wildlife rescue about 10 years ago, and after her studies, now she's traveling through Vietnam. Connie Needham, welcome to Travel Devil.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, can you introduce yourself in your own words first so that my listeners can get to know you?
Yeah, of course. As you've already mentioned, my background's in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. I started working with animals when I was in university. I kind of had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I actually dropped out of my degree and went to South Africa and started helping on an African elephant research unit, and just absolutely fell in love with wildlife and nature and how connected it can make us feel to the environment and the planet, and learned so much about ethics and interactions with animals as well. So I've been in love with it ever since. Fell in love with primatology when I left university and started working on a monkey sanctuary. And that became my main focus for my master's degree as well, and a big part of me coming to Southeast Asia and falling in love with primates all over the continent here.
Okay. And before we started the interview, you told me that there might be a couple of problems with the audio. It's not sure because there's a heavy rainstorm. Could you explain what's going on in Vietnam at the moment where you are?
Yes, we've just entered rainy season in Vietnam. So it's not dramatic, but we do have some wild rains and winds every now and then, and it's a little bit unpredictable. So we never know what's going to happen.
Okay, good to know. Did you actually travel a lot when you were a kid?
I traveled a fair amount as a child, but I would say there's like one big trip that stands out to me in my childhood was my mum had always wanted to go to an African safari in Kenya. So for her birthday one year, she took me and my sister with her. We went on an African safari. And that is my main memory of any travel as a child. It's the first time I saw an African elephant and fell in love with animals. And yeah, it was amazing. I think other than that, it was very much small family holidays. And my travel really started when I was in university and was able to sort of make my own decisions about where I wanted to go and save up my own money for things.
Yeah. That's beautiful that you have this one memory, and it's also connected to what you're doing today. So that's amazing. And was sustainability something that you thought was important for you as a kid when you're reflecting on it?
Sustainability is something, again, that came into my life more in my university days. So I started thinking about it a little bit as a child because I started thinking about animal welfare as a child. And I grew up in the Scottish countryside next to lots of farmland and big fields of cows. And there were not many other children in my neighborhood. So I made friends with the cows instead. And there was one particular cow, Daisy, who I absolutely fell in love with. And it took me a long time to understand that Daisy was taken away as part of the meat industry. And that really spiraled me into thinking about animal welfare. And obviously, the more you learn as well about the meat and dairy industry, the more you learn about sustainability. And by the time I was in university, I was vegetarian, ended up going vegan there, and then joining climate action societies because that's what all the vegan people there were doing, and then getting more and more involved in that and understanding sustainability more. So it's not something necessarily that I feel I was born into thinking about it, but it very much grew and developed, to where I am now, where it's a huge part of my life.
Oh, wow. So when you became vegetarian, was that during the time when you found out the story about Daisy the cow who wasn't Daisy anymore because it was another cow?
It was a similar time. So when I realized, this cow that I was talking to every day as a little lonely child was taken away and obviously eaten, I definitely thought twice. And, as a kid, I started becoming just very picky with meat because I don't think I really had the understanding to make the full decisions. So there was a long time that I didn't eat red meat or just didn't eat meat that looked too much like an animal. And then again, it was more sort of in my mid-teens that I started to actually be like, okay, no, I don't want to eat meat, and went more vegetarian.
Yeah, I'm actually a vegetarian as well. And for me, it started when I was a kid because I was horse riding a lot. I was really a horse girly through and through. And I saw that there was one day I came home and there was like a little magazine, and they were writing in the magazine that they sell horse meat, and they also have like the baby horse meat. And it really made me think. I was really like very upset about the fact that we could just buy this horse meat. And then I started to criticize myself. I was like, why do I not want to eat a horse? Actually, I shouldn't eat a cow. I shouldn't eat any animal. And gradually I started eating less and less. And one day I just came to my mom and dad and was like, hey, like I really don't want to eat an animal anymore. And they were like, okay, if you don't want to, we're not going to force you to it. So it went really smooth. But yeah, I think we got lucky also that we could do that. I don't think every parent lets their child become vegetarian.
No, I mean, my mum was very supportive, but particularly when I told her that I went vegan, I'd already moved out. So, it wasn't really, she didn't have to do much, but she still found it really difficult. So I told her just before I was due to go to South Africa for a month so that while I was away, she could get over it. And by the time I came back, she was excited about it. There's so many things to try now.
Amazing. Yeah. Seeing the positive in it. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and so now you're in Vietnam. You arrived there by doing like backpacking, volunteering. You're working as well as a content creator. I didn't mention that before, but you do. And so I actually want to get to, how did you get to that place?
It feels like such a long story. So I'm going to do my best to give a little like whistle-stop tour of it. But I was working on a primate sanctuary in South Africa pretty much throughout COVID and a little bit after. And I left my job there and was just a little bit lost, I guess. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I ended up traveling around Southern and Eastern Africa and just figuring out how to make things work. I've always loved content and education and using social media to actually teach people and talk about things. It's something I started doing when I first went vegan, and used it to talk to my friends and family about veganism without having to actually sit down and talk to them if they didn't want to. So while I was traveling around Southern and Eastern Africa, I started applying that more to wildlife education and talking about the animals I would come across and how we interact with them and everything like that. And from there, I applied to do a master's degree in anthrozoology, which is all about human-animal relationships. And a lot of that I also brought into my online education. And luckily, it was all a distance learning degree. So I did everything online. So I decided, why not go somewhere amazing in the world that I don't know anything about and get to know the animals there and use that as a basis for a lot of things I was writing about in my master's degree. So I came originally to Thailand and traveled through Thailand. Then I spent a long time traveling through Cambodia and eventually Vietnam. And that's kind of now why I'm here. I ended up getting a little bit stuck around Vietnam because it's so amazing and beautiful. And I think there's still so much more Southeast Asia I need to see and learn about. So I've been here on and off for about a year now.
Amazing. Okay. And could you tell me, as a backpacker or as a traveler through Southeast Asian countries, how do you get in contact with wildlife?
It really is quite dependent on the person and what it is you're traveling for, what you're likely to see. A lot of people, if they already have an interest in animals or wildlife, there are a lot of wildlife facilities and sanctuaries around Southeast Asia. And that tends to be more for sort of elephants, bears, that kind of vibe, bigger animals. And some are amazing and doing incredible work and you learn a lot, some less so. Whereas if you're maybe a little bit less interested or not going to sanctuaries, what you're more likely to come across is, say, primates. You find them a lot in the streets or on certain mountains, a lot in temples and things like that. You can come across wild troops pretty much anywhere in Southeast Asia. Every country I've been to and everywhere I've stayed, I've ended up finding some kind of monkey somewhere. And also, obviously, if you go to things like markets and meat markets, it's very different what you may or may not find there.
Mm-hmm. And so the biggest issue you come across seems to be primates. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. The primates are most abundant, most easy to access, and what live closest to human areas.
Yeah, and if I can interrupt you there, primates, that's a word that I'm not super familiar with. Is that the same as a monkey? Can you explain the terminology?
So primates, in sort of the most simple terms, it's a group of mammals. And within that group, we are primates, as are monkeys, and as apes and smaller bodied apes. There's quite a few different groups in there. Within Southeast Asia, what you're going to come across would be the monkeys, which are like macaques and langurs and, what we generally think of when we think of like cheeky little monkeys. They're quite small, they have tails, and you may also come across primarily gibbons, which are smaller bodied apes. So they're different to monkeys in that they don't have tails, they have bigger bodies, they have bigger brain size, but they're not quite as big as the great apes, which would be like the orangutans.
All right. And you also mentioned very briefly that people could find other animals to eat, like different from European countries, in the supermarket. Now, walking with you through the supermarket in Vietnam, what are the things I would find, like if I'm interested in eating meats?
So it's not like supermarkets as we would think of in the West. It's more markets like stores in the streets, street food, that kind of vibe. Honestly, I don't have a lot of experience going into meat markets because obviously I don't eat meat. My experience largely has been through my studies and research, and that was based more in Cambodia than in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But there are still places that will use certain primates. For example, there's a slow loris, the little primates with very big eyes, kind of bush baby-esque. Sometimes their parts are used in medicines, and you can sometimes find little bits like that in markets. There's also a big dog and cat meat trade here in Vietnam. So there are markets around me where you can also find dog meat. So it's something to be aware of in terms of your own ethics and where you stand on things. It's nice to know what the meat is maybe before you purchase it. And particularly any primate style meat is usually linked to a lot of unsustainable hunting practices because primates are largely dying out around Southeast Asia. So yeah, meat markets, it's just good to ask and try and be as informed as possible about what you might be buying.
In general, would you say it's a no-go, definitely to eat primates when you're traveling through those countries?
I would personally say yes. Primates such as macaques that are more abundant, I haven't really seen as used in markets. The ones that I see more or that I have learned more about in terms of use in medicine tend to be primates that are a little bit rarer. And, one of the huge threats to them is hunting. And when you see populations decreasing in the way that they are, you don't want to be doing anything that's going to be supporting the hunting of that animal.
Yeah. Thinking back also on what we're talking now about, like bad captivation of animals, hunting animals. I'm thinking back about a podcast I previously had with Margarita Samsonova about wildlife volunteering, and we discussed safari tourism, such as elephant baiting as well. We didn't touch on the topic of primates though, but because you have experience with African wildlife tourism and Southeast Asian wildlife tourism, what do you see as the biggest difference between both?
So it's hard. It's not something that I can say, I've intensely studied. So anything I say is just my personal experience of how it's felt. But there's a big difference for me when African tourism, that a lot of people come because they want to see animals looking, majestic in the wild. They want the safari experience. They want to be in a car and feeling like the animals are doing their own thing and they're sort of in their territory, in their land. Southeast Asia, I've noticed more of a tendency to try and bring the animals to us. There's more of, sort of like the classic selfie opportunity kind of thing, more captive animals on chains, animals being brought, even into bars and things like that. It feels more like, that's the biggest difference. In Africa, I felt like even if it's not legitimate and there's a lot going on behind the scenes that's not ethical, that there was at least this pretense of being wild. And I don't feel that so much in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. By the way, for anybody who's interested in the other podcast episode we're referring, it's episode 16. And yes, it's interesting to hear the difference. So it's basically the African wildlife. We're still going to visit the wildlife, whereas for the Asian, Southeast Asian wildlife, it's more like the wildlife is coming on the streets, like to us, into the bars, into the streets.
Yeah, and more, I would say, zoo vibes as well in a lot of the facilities.
Okay, so let's get into the topic of primates even deeper. You briefly mentioned how one can come across primates, but can you tell me where would one find primates in Southeast Asian countries?
So the primates you're most likely to come across would be macaques, which are gray monkeys. There's a lot of different types of macaques, but I'll use macaques as the general grouping. They're very common in temples. So if you're going, say, temple tours in Cambodia, things like that, you're quite likely to see them. And there's also wild groups that live pretty close to urban areas. The macaques are really known for like being fed by humans and therefore being very drawn to human areas and really liking human food. So if you're living somewhere or traveling through somewhere that has a lot of green space or mountain space, it's very likely that just on the outskirts of towns and cities, you'll find macaques. Some places they are rampant just in the middle of the city itself. They're pretty ballsy, macaques.
Are they big? Like, if I don't really know how a macaque looks like. Like, what size does it have? Does it have big teeth? Like, what can I imagine?
So it depends a lot on the type of macaque and also age, sex, everything. I would say you're thinking like large house cat maybe size in general for the male. Like they're not huge because monkeys in general are smaller and apes and smaller bodied apes are the bigger ones. So no, they're not massive. Some of the males can get quite chunky and quite big, and the males can have quite big canines. So I definitely would not want to be bitten by one, but they're not huge, no.
Okay. And so you were saying like there's interaction with them through feeding. Are there other kinds of interactions that people have with those primates?
Yeah, so with the macaques, feeding is definitely the biggest issue. You'll find a lot of places where people will even set up stalls to like sell you food to say, oh, there's some monkeys near here. Take this food and go feed them and take pictures and things like that. This other issue that you can have is monkeys on chains that are used for selfie opportunities and for tourist interaction. It can happen with macaques, definitely. I've heard of it more so with gibbons. So gibbons, going back to when we spoke about primates, they are smaller bodied apes. They're bigger than macaques, maybe twice as big even.
Oh, wow.
Pretty big. They're not, we're not talking orangutan size, but they're not tiny. And they are really threatened by the tourism industry. Their populations have been declining rapidly across Southeast Asia. And one of the biggest threats is that they are taken from the wild and used for things such as photo opportunities. And when they're taken from the wild, more likely than not, they're taken as a baby because they're very, very strong. And to take and control an already fully grown gibbon is very difficult. Whereas obviously a baby, it's cute. People want the pictures. They're a little bit easier to train or try and habituate to things. But to take the baby, often the whole family may have to be killed because they're very protective. So it's a huge threat. And they may be put on chains and brought to places like bars, to the beach. You'll sometimes see both gibbons and macaques on chains on people's shoulders, and people will come over and be like, oh, would you like a picture? Like a picture with the gibbon, a picture with the macaque, and they charge tourists to do that.
So basically, if I see a gibbon on somebody's shoulder, it's also most definitely already like definitely a baby, because otherwise like this size wouldn't fit on the shoulder.
Yeah, generally when gibbons get older, being in captivity, separated from their family and being, living on a chain and losing all their natural behaviors because they're around humans all the time, it often leads to a psychosis in a gibbon. So the older they get, the harder they are to control, and also the more erratic they may be. And like I say, they're very strong. So it's more likely they will end up caged when they get older.
What do people do with the gibbons in cages?
So it's very dependent because, in rare cases, a gibbon might grow older and people do keep them out of cages and still use them for photo opportunities and everything. If they get older and, like I say, they become too strong, difficult to manage, develop a psychosis and are in a cage, they can be in that cage potentially for the rest of their lives. They can also be sold because given parts go for a lot of money, again, in sort of traditional medicines and bushmeat trade. And in the very kind of lucky occasion for the gibbon, they might be rescued. There are some rescue centers, such as the Gibbon Rehabilitation Project in Phuket in Thailand, that does try and take however many gibbons they can to rehabilitate and release back into the wild. And a lot will come from this industry of tourism and having got to an age where they're seen maybe no longer of use.
How does feeding a monkey impact them?
So feeding, they said, is more likely with the macaques. A lot of the time, people feeding monkeys, it can come from a really good and beautiful place that I can understand entirely, because food is a love language in my family. And I feel like when you see an animal and you want to feed an animal, it's more often an act of love and of wanting to connect and be close to them. But there's just a lot of misunderstanding about their nutritional needs, their behavior, their hierarchies that can lead to a lot of issues. So, for example, a lot of the time, people don't know what food macaques eat. And the food that we may be giving them is generally, it's fun. It's a novel food that they're not out finding in the wild. It's usually high in calories and probably for them pretty nutritionally void. So even things like really sugary fruits, yes, they eat, but it shouldn't make up the bulk of their diet. And, you know, I've seen people give macaques crisps, cakes, biscuits, like anything. And that's just, it's not good for them. So it has a couple of different impacts. One is it can reduce their foraging behavior. So essentially, if you have a group of macaques and people are feeding them all the time, they think, oh, this is great. I come over here, I sit and look cute, and I get all my food for the day. And I don't even have to bother going and finding my food in the trees and foraging in bushes anymore. Like, who needs it? But that's a very important natural behavior for them. It's not only something that's very psychologically stimulating, but macaques learn through generational knowledge. So if one generation believes we no longer need to forage, their babies don't learn how to forage either. And, you know, say for one day that food provisioning that people are giving, it goes, well, they don't know how to forage anymore. They can't self-sustain. And that is a problem.
So that's also they become dependent on tourism.
Exactly. It's a cycle, because the more dependent they become, the less likely they are to be able to live in the wild. And then instead of going back to the wild to try and eat, maybe they move closer and closer to human areas and steal human food, because that's what they are now seeing as their food.
Yeah.
Because, you know, imagine you're a farmer living in a rural area, and now suddenly all the macaques every day are raiding your bins and coming into your place and trying to steal your food. And it can be scary as well. We don't need to be living in quite such close proximity to them.
And so they can also become aggressive then?
Yes. So feeding has a lot of links to increased aggression in macaque groups. There's a lot of different reasons for it. One potential reason, people really love to feed babies because babies are stinking cute. We all know it. But in a lot of macaque sort of culture, babies eat last, and there's a very strict hierarchy to follow. And so when babies are getting given all this novel, exciting food first, it can really increase what is called infant-directed aggression. So adults within the group can attack the young because that food, in order of the hierarchy, should be theirs. And that can increase aggression within the troop. It can also create frustrations, which causes aggression towards the human. Because, if a monkey's like, you're breaking the hierarchy, or you're bringing all this exciting food, and I now have to fight everyone else to get it off you because it should be mine, that can lead to something very aggressive. And again, if, say, a tourist hasn't fed that particular monkey in a little while, they're really excited to get this novel food, and they don't have the same concept of possession that we do. Just because we're holding it doesn't mean that it's ours and not theirs. So if they have to take it from us, they'll take it from us. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different ways in which it can increase aggression and also change behaviors. So, for example, in Gibraltar, there's a big group of Barbary macaques leaving Southeast Asia now, but just as an interesting example, that have learned to steal objects like glasses and stuff and barter them for food, or like people's phones. And so if they have your phone, you're not getting it back unless you give them some food. And that's been noted in quite a few different macaque troops. You know, they're really learning not just how to be aggressive, but how to kind of be a little bit of a pain in the ass. And it's not helpful for anyone.
That's crazy. Like, how did they even learn how to steal in order to trade? And that's...
Yeah, right. Because they're thought of in a lot of ways as very stupid, because people think, oh, they're aggressive and they just take and they don't think, or like they're dumb. But when you look at things like that, they're incredibly intelligent and they can learn amazing, like complex things. And really, we just don't need to be teaching them that, because all it's going to do is make conflict with us down the line even worse.
Yeah. And before we were also talking about selfie opportunities, that was with mostly happening with gibbons, which are apes. Am I right?
Gibbons are smaller bodied apes.
Smaller bodied apes. Okay.
They used to be called lesser apes, but lesser sounds like a little bit mean, a little bit sad. So I think there's been more of a push to use terminology like smaller bodied apes.
Okay, amazing. Okay. I was wondering if you could tell me, like, what was the first time you came into an encounter where you were visiting this country, you were there for the first time, seeing like, oh gosh, this monkey is chained on the ankle or wherever, I don't know, and people are proposing me to take a selfie with them.
So I've been, I guess, a mixture of really, really lucky and really strategic in where I place myself. And so I haven't been in a situation where I've had to see the monkey itself on a chain or the gibbon itself on a chain. A lot of the learnings I've had have been through visiting rescue centers and sanctuaries and facilities within the area and learning from them the situations they have found the primates in, and learning from them, where does this happen? Okay, so I won't go and support that place, or like, I won't go visit that area. So yeah, I've been very, very lucky. But I would say in terms of gibbons and selfies, it was when I visited the Gibbon Rehabilitation Project. I did like a day experience there where we made some enrichment for the gibbons and we learned all about their work and saw some of the rescues who were undergoing rehabilitation. And they were who told me everything about the trade. They had the videos, the photos of, you know, really sad photo that sticks with me of a gibbon like on a bar counter where, you know, everyone just has their alcohol, is having drinks, and this poor gibbon was just chained up there ready for people to take pictures with.
That's so sad.
You know, it's horrible. I'm very, very lucky I haven't seen it. I have seen elephants a lot chained up. That's much harder to avoid. But luckily, the primates, I've been able to strategically stay away from the areas. And I would say Phuket, from what I've heard, is one of the worst places for it. And maybe because I didn't go to the party areas in Phuket because I don't really like to party. That's maybe one of the reasons I didn't see as much. And also, I would say as awareness increases, it becomes more and more underground.
And if we would see, for example, a gibbon attached with a chain, maybe even broader, when we see primates being mistreated, what are the things we shouldn't do there?
I mean, I would say the number one thing not to do is get into a fight because it's like a very passionate topic and it's very upsetting to see. And I think it can be very easily escalated into a bit of a screaming match. I think there has to be an element of understanding and compassion, particularly around Southeast Asia. My experience has been a lot of the people who have primates in these situations or who are encouraging, say, feeding and selling food to feed primates, it's not coming from malicious intent. It's coming a lot from misunderstanding. It's coming from a need for income and generally just getting into a fight, particularly with a language barrier. All it's going to do is create tension, and anything of value you say is going to be lost. Yeah. So generally, if you have a conversation, I would say try and keep things calm and respectful and understanding. And I think the best thing to do is to try and document it if you can. Try and get a picture, know exactly the area where it is, and speak to a sanctuary or facility in the area and ask them like, oh, do you know this is happening? what do you recommend for this specific area is a good course of action? Because it's going to be different everywhere around the world. And they may already have relationships with some of these people and have a much better understanding of how to intervene.
Yeah, but if I'm a tourist in this area and I don't really know so much about it, it's like a big thing for me to be like, okay, I'm going to take a picture and then I'm going to try to find an email and then I'm going to send the picture and then like I need to really push it. Like, is there...
I mean, I would say the easiest thing you can do, vocalize disappointment, let people know you're not purchasing from them and why, because a loss of income is often more impactful than anything else. You can definitely, if you get pictures and information, you can talk about things on social media. Sometimes that's easier and quicker than having to report it officially. If you can get it online, and always just make sure anything you post online is coming with very clear context, that I'm not posting this picture of this monkey on a chain because it's cute. I'm posting it because this is really bad. And you need to know in this area, this is happening. And maybe it's easier to find an Instagram handle of a sanctuary or a facility or a bigger org that you can tag in it or something like that.
Yeah, and let's say that you want to do something. How do I go and find these organizations if I'm in a country that I don't know the language of? I only visiting this country for like, let's say 2 weeks. What can I do?
So this is honestly, I think the hardest part of Southeast Asia is distinguishing what are legitimate sanctuaries and centers and where can you go for help. It's actually a subtle plug here. It's a big part of why I've set up my business, Project Wild, that a huge part of it is creating a database of reputable and reliable sanctuaries and facilities around the world that you can support, but also go to for help in these kinds of situations. You can obviously do the basic things like Google in the area, just see what comes up. If you really are passionate and want to put a little bit of time and energy into it, I would say just look for facilities that aren't themselves posting a lot of pictures of people posing with animals and things like that. These are also things I think you covered with Marga in your episode on safari tourism, being aware of the basic red flags of a facility so that you can go on their website and just have a look and be like, oh, do they look legit? If so, do they have a contact page? Okay, let me just shoot this in and see what comes up. And also I'd say in Southeast Asia, Facebook is king. I had to remake a Facebook account when I came here. Facebook is just, everyone here uses Facebook and every organization is on Facebook. So it can sometimes be the fastest way to contact anyone.
Okay, good to know, good to know. And you were mentioning your own organization. Could you just give me the website link so that if people who now are interested can go and Google it?
It's just projectwild.uk. And if you do projectwild.uk and a /wild guide, or one word, that is where I'm just starting to build up my database of facilities. It's only been launched this year, so it's very new. It's a little baby business. But while I'm based in Southeast Asia, one of my big goals is to visit as many of these places as possible and essentially do all the research and legwork for you so people don't have to. And the ones that are operating to a really high standard, they'll all get featured on the guide.
Yeah, I thank you for that because I think that's really like intensive work. And it's amazing that you're sharing this information with future travelers who then don't have to do all of this research before. It's making life easier for many people, I think. So that's amazing. I will put the link in the show notes, so you can find it over there as well. You were saying, mentioning things that we shouldn't do. Are there any other things in that list that you want to mention before we go to the what should we do more deeply?
I think the last thing I would like to mention is about buying animals. So this is from my experience working in a primate sanctuary. There are some very beautiful, well-intentioned people who see an animal in distress and think, I just need to get this individual out of here. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to offer to buy them because money is king, you know, if people can get money for this animal, absolutely, they will. And I can completely understand the logic because I so believe every individual life matters. But in the long term, all that's actually doing is creating a culture where animals are commodities. And it's encouraging taking animals from the wild and bringing them into these environments, because not only can you get some quick cash of them, you know, with the selfies and everything like that, eventually someone will also buy them. And that's your other problem solved. They're then taken away and you can go get another one that's younger or easier or anything like that. It creates a cycle that is bred from such beautiful, lovely intention, but is ultimately just going to lead to more individuals being within that system.
But yeah, it comes from good intentions, like you're saying. Can we, before we getting into the do's, can you one more time, just to have like a wrap review of all of the things we shouldn't do? Could you shortlist it for me very quickly so that we get an overview?
So first, very simple, don't take part in the activity. Try not to get into any fights with anyone. Don't buy any animals. And if you're putting anything on social media, make sure there's always context with it. Don't post something that might just be mistaken as cute or glamorizing the situation.
Wrote it down, checked it off. Let's go talk about what we should do, right? What can we do to have a good experience or to improve the situation which is there, which isn't great?
Mm-hmm. So we've sort of covered already reporting things where possible to sanctuaries and facilities. I would say that's the most powerful thing that you can do. But alongside that, as you spoke about as well with social media, is talking about issues. A lot of this, as I've said, it doesn't come from malicious intent. It comes from misunderstanding. And every time you can tell one person, oh, don't feed a monkey, we're like, oh, but I like feeding monkeys. Why? When you can tell them, don't feed a monkey because this is what's going to happen. These are the issues it leads to. And, you can say, I didn't get a chance earlier to cover it, but monkeys that are fed by humans, they get obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, even reduced fertility. So, when you can actually bring the facts to a wider audience, I think that's really powerful as well. It's not just about telling people, don't do something, tell them why, get people engaged and involved, because so many of us love animals. And it's not that we do things to be mean or cruel. We just don't understand. So spreading awareness, spreading education is an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, you were mentioning like earlier on in our conversation, like the medicine part of the animals. How can we make sure that we are informed on this?
Again, it's more of a tricky one for me because I don't have as much exposure in meat markets and things like that. I would say it's always going to be good to have some basic phrases translated and saved on your phone. And I would also say in general, be cautious. There's a lot of beauty and interest and things to appreciate within traditional medicines, but I would always ask questions, be cautious of what you're taking, make sure you know what you're putting into your body. If you don't know, if in doubt, just pass by. I feel like there's a lot of pressure that in order to experience the culture fully, you have to be able to take part in absolutely everything. But, as someone who's traveled around Southern and Eastern Africa and Southeast Asia as a vegan, I've not taken part in a lot of things, but I've still had amazing interactions with people who live there. I've still learned so much about the culture and people and been so impacted by things. And saying no to one little thing or one little experience because you're not so sure if you're going to be comfortable if you find out what it is, it's just really not the end of the world. There'll be other things.
Yeah. I love it when some people, or well, actually don't love it, but when some people, you're traveling to their country and they're like, oh, well, you have to taste the meat. And if you don't taste it, you don't know what it's like. Yeah, but I don't need it. So we discussed all the things we can do as an outsider as well. So basically, you're also saying we should never feed an animal and we should also never take a selfie opportunity. Like, there's no good way of doing that, because when I was asking, like, is there a thing we can do? There's no better way to take a selfie. Like, any selfie with a primate is actually a no-go.
Yeah, anything that's encouraging you to be interacting with them is just like, there's no need.
Okay, and let's now talk a little bit about more beautiful interactions, because I'm sure there are as well beautiful opportunities to interact with them when maybe it's a little bit more outside of like this very touristic area. Maybe to get into the topic, could you explain or tell me a beautiful story of a positive interaction you had with an ape or a monkey?
Yeah, so again, this is coming out of Southeast Asia briefly, but one that just immediately comes to mind, I was staying in Kenya, and Kenya is one of my favorite, most beautiful places in the world. And also because where I was staying, there were like 5 different kinds of primate that just lived freely and roamed around. So it was amazing. And I was staying in a tree house, and I remember coming out in the morning and just sitting there waiting while it was cool, and a beautiful black and white colobus monkey and their teeny tiny little baby just appearing in the trees right in front of me, and just spending their whole morning sitting there, grooming, playing. The baby was sort of like learning how to climb a little bit, and to be able to just sit and watch that and appreciate that beautiful like mother-child moment, because I'm such a mummy's girl. I love my mom. And so to see that in another species and see the connection for me was so beautiful. And I think all of my best memories of primates have been things like that, when I didn't expect to see them. And then they're just there living their lives and having these beautiful interactions, and they're just at peace. And I think it's amazing. It's one of the best feelings.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. And I also saw, I think it was on your Instagram, that you saw gibbons, or you heard gibbons recently, because you also mentioned the project that you went to. Could you tell me a beautiful story about that place?
No, that was really beautiful. It's in Laos. It's called the Gibbon Experience. It's actually very popular with backpackers traveling through Southeast Asia. And so that's why I wanted to go. I wanted to know, is this legit? Is it ethical? And I was actually really, really impressed with the project as a whole, because there is no guarantee you're going to see gibbons. Essentially, what you do is you go trekking into the forest in one of the national parks. And I spent 3 days and 2 nights there. You sleep in the world's tallest tree houses, and you get across the national park with zip lines. That's why it's called the Gibbon Experience, because it's like you're flying through the trees, which is so cool. And there is a big focus on ecotourism and sustainability and respect for the wildlife in the national park. Obviously, it's not ideal, because anything that takes humans into wild areas is like not perfect. But we want to do that. We want to experience it, and we want to be in those areas. So finding a way to do it in as non-invasive a way as possible, I think, is really awesome, and something that does need to happen and be worked on. And for one of the mornings, we zip-lined to like a little platform and watched the sunrise, and could just hear all of the gibbons within the forest singing to each other.
Wow. Do you have a voice memo of that, or like a sound recording?
I do. If I play it, will it be picked up?
Yeah, yeah. Can you play it to me?
Yeah. It's on my Instagram. Auto plug. So they do that every morning. They sing in pairs and do duets, and it's ways to mark their territory and wake up for the day. And it was just gorgeous. If you're lucky, I think there's maybe like a 50% chance that you'll also see them moving through the trees. I didn't see them, but honestly did not even need to. Just hearing them was so beautiful.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing these beautiful interactions. Actually, I feel like you're more commonly going to have a bad interaction with a primate when you're traveling through these countries. So you say yourself that you didn't have like so many bad interactions because you've been well educated on which places you need to go to. I think typical tourists, they are not as educated on the topic. Maybe they just want to have an interaction with the primates, so they don't really see the problematic part of going to these touristic hotspots. So I was wondering, how can tourists that want to have great interactions and find positive ones?
There's definitely things you can do, because you're going to come across primates, particularly macaques. And if you know just some basic rules of how to conduct yourself, then you can have really beautiful encounters. Because you're right, a lot of people get stuff stolen, some people can get bitten, but it's generally because of human behavior, not because of the primates. So if you come across primates, there's a few little things to keep in mind. The first is keep your distance. You never really want to be going up and trying to touch them. That can spook them. It can be incredibly intimidating. And so, of course, they're likely to lash out. You also particularly want to keep distance if there's babies around. The troop can be very protective of babies. So you want to try and not, say you have a mum on the left and a baby on the right, you don't want to walk between them because then you're cutting the mum off from their baby, and that can be very stressful and scary. So in general, just keeping a nice bit of distance. As we've said, don't feed or bait them. That's going to make the interaction much more dangerous as well. Keep your voices low. You don't want to be spooking them. There's no need to be screaming or yelling. It's very exciting when you see a monkey. I know, I understand completely. But yeah, keeping calm is very, very important. And avoiding eye contact. A lot of monkeys, macaque culture, you can perceive eye contact as a bit of a threat. It's like you're being very heavily perceived when someone is making eye contact with you, you know? And even as a person, that can feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's like, why is that person looking directly at me and into me? Same for monkeys. You don't want to be having prolonged eye contact with them because it can definitely make them a little bit grumpy.
Okay. And can you tell me, did you ever had an encounter with macaques?
Yes, I've seen loads of macaques. I have a lot of them both in, actually, yeah, everywhere I've been in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, macaques everywhere. I'm very lucky I haven't had any issues of being bitten, but I have definitely had macaques come at me a little bit. They can be aggressive again if they're used to humans being a pain or feeding them. The best thing to remember, like I said, is stay calm. You don't necessarily want to run away from a monkey coming towards you because then you just look a bit like a game, you know? If something runs, something wants to chase. The easiest thing generally to do is to back away, keep your distance, keep calm. If a monkey jumps on you, I had this with friends when I was in Phuket. A monkey jumped on their back because he wanted to steal their glasses. An easy way to sort of get them to maybe jump off you is, again, to stay very, very calm and still, but lean your body forwards. So you're slowly changing the level that the macaque is at. As you lean forwards, very often a monkey's instinct is to jump off your back. So that's the way to try and encourage them off you. Otherwise, honestly, if they want to take something from you, unless it's something that you're going to die without, I would let them take it and just cut your losses and leave. And yeah, just generally taking precautions, like if you know there's monkeys in an area, don't take food with you. Don't take open bags that they can get into. Try and, instead of having things in your pockets, have them in zipped areas. Don't tempt them.
It's interesting to hear that, because I would also, in my mind, also think like maybe it's good to have something with you so that if they're stealing my glasses, I can give something to them, because if I don't have anything and they're stealing my glasses, then I just lost my glasses.
You can definitely, so if you are someone who has to wear glasses all the time around monkeys, my friends now are just slightly blind when we see monkeys. They just put their glasses away.
Okay,
but
good to know.
obviously,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
need your glasses all the time, then you can try and have something. I would just say whatever you have, it can't be obvious, because if the monkey can see or smell it, it's going to attract them to you. And also, if a monkey sees you like rummaging around in a bag to try and get something, then they're going to be like, oh, what's that? I want to come and rummage around in that bag. So I'd say be cautious with it. The best thing is to try and keep your distance so that they're not going to come and try and take something off you in the first place.
So actually, it's also good to know, like big earrings maybe, or glasses, like if you don't have to wear them, or if you can wear lenses. That's for me maybe a thing that if next time, if I ever need to have an encounter, or if I'm in such a place, I will just wear my lenses, and then I don't have a problem anymore, and put away my sunglasses.
Yeah. And again, it's not like a guarantee that it's going to happen, but we also have to remember these primates, these monkeys, were really here before us tourists were. And we're encroaching on their space. So us taking a few precautions and having a few thoughts about how to conduct ourselves around them, I don't feel like it's asking a lot, you know? If you're going into, it's like any culture when traveling. If you're going into another culture's space, you think about it. You think about what is appropriate and what's going to make the people who live there comfortable. And wildlife is the same. Why would we not think about going into their space? What will make them comfortable?
And are there a lot of macaques, for example, who are attacking humans? What happens if you're attacked by a macaque and let's say he bit you? What's the consequence of that?
So it does happen often in areas where they're fed. And it's, again, something I noticed largely in Phuket and in the islands around. The monkeys there can be quite aggressive. So it's not, out with the possibility that you're going to get attacked and bitten. It can happen particularly if you're pushing things. It can happen also if you're doing absolutely nothing and you're just super unlucky, but is less likely. I'd say, again, things to remember: if you're traveling anywhere with monkeys, make sure you're up to date on any kind of rabies vaccinations. That's really, really important. That's the main concern if a monkey bites you. So if you get bitten, you want to clean it thoroughly, generally with soap and water if you can, and go to hospital as soon as possible to get a rabies booster. Even if you think, oh, this animal didn't look sick, it's just better to do. It doesn't cost a lot around Southeast Asia to get a rabies booster, and it's going to put your mind at ease. And then the next concern would be infection. So with any kind of wound, because it's a puncture wound, it's like a bite wound, sorry, it's a puncture wound. It's more open to infection than, say, like a little scratch. And obviously, you know, animals, they have a lot of bacteria on them that our bodies aren't used to. So you want to really keep it clean, keep any eye for any signs of infection, any swelling, any redness, any heat coming off it. And if you feel anything like that, go to a doctor again.
Yeah.
It's fine. It'll heal. I have been bitten by monkeys actually a fair few times in my life because I've worked in primate rehabilitation and I've worked with some monkeys who were not very happy. And it's always been fine. So just take the necessary precautions.
Okay. And when you were bitten, it was because they were scared, or out of which place was it coming? Because you were working in a rescue place, so actually they are not, as I would think, not an immediate danger anymore, or they don't want, I don't know how that would happen. Is it coming from a place where they're afraid of you?
Yeah, it's very much coming from fear. So I'm very lucky. I haven't been bitten by any wild monkeys. And again, I think it's generally because I take a lot of precaution. As someone who's worked with monkeys so much in their life, I'm still scared of monkeys and I act accordingly. In rescue settings, I mean, I worked in orphan rehabilitation, so I worked with young monkeys who were very scared and traumatized when they came in, and they did require hands-on care. So getting bitten by them, half of the course, but they're tiny. It's not that big a deal. Bigger monkeys that I've been bitten by, say, the most likely scenario for that is one that like escapes from an enclosure or that has had terrible experiences with humans and is in a situation where they need something doing with them that they don't want to have done. It's fear. It's, you know, aggression in that setting very rarely comes just for the sake of aggression. Or you've done something where you've accidentally walked into a part of the troop where you shouldn't have, and you've, like I said, cut off a mother from their baby or something.
To round up the conversation around it, I was wondering if you can convince me or give me a little pep talk, and all of my listeners a little pep talk on why they should try to find a meaningful and ethical encounter with primates.
I mean, we are primates. You know, we have a very natural curiosity about primates because whether they're great apes, which are considered very close to humans, we are within the great ape family, or monkeys, there's so much similarity that we can see. And I would say I have learned so much about human culture and about relationships and about myself just through sitting and watching monkeys and through taking the time to see their individual personalities. They're one of, in my opinion, one of the easiest kind of group of species to sit and recognize individuals and be like, oh, that's the big daddy alpha. Like he likes to behave in this way. Or this little baby is the cheeky ass one who will try and slap you if you get too close. There's so much interest. It's sometimes like watching a reality TV show. It's so much. It's a psychological experiment, you know, it's so interesting. You learn so much. And you also can get such a sense of peace. Like I said, when I see the mother and their baby and you see your relationship with your mother potentially reflected back in that, it's like you're getting a window into a very personal, private part of their life that's so beautiful and so special to witness. And I don't know, I can't imagine, as I'm monkey crazed, I can't imagine not seeing that now or not having that connection, that experience. It's made me appreciate so much other species and the individual lives other species lead. And it's just beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's good to hear. And so I would also think that what you're also suggesting is that people who are going to Southeast Asian countries, that they are going to these rescue centers or to other centers where one can volunteer or one can visit this location instead of going to, well, the wildlife which is on the street. But then I quickly want to ask you a question on that, because I'm wondering if I'm a person, like I don't know so much about it still, like I'm learning a lot today by talking to you. But now I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to a rescue center, I would think they would want me to volunteer, which would mean that I need to take a week, 2 weeks at least to be there. But let's say I'm only visiting this location for like 2 weeks, this whole as country. But I still want to have an interaction. Like, is it also possible for me to go visit this place for only one day, or is that actually not really something one can do?
A lot of rescue centers and facilities do day tours, activities, group tours. I've actually only done one full volunteer experience in Southeast Asia, and everything else I've done has been visiting facilities for a day, a couple of days, sometimes, to interviews and things like that there. But generally, as a tourist, again, going back to the Gibbon Rehabilitation Project in Phuket, it was a day experience of going and making the enrichment, learning about the work, seeing the enrichment delivered to the animals. And yes, as a volunteer, you definitely get more behind the scenes look into things, and you get more opportunity to be more engaged with the work and the animals. But you can absolutely visit a lot of these places as day visits.
Yeah. And you used to volunteer, now you're doing day visits. So you definitely know the difference, I guess. And I think it's also good that when you're visiting these locations, even if it's only for one day, you're also putting the money where it should be and not giving the money to the people to feed the monkeys on the street, but you're giving the money to the rescue centers, which are actually helping and benefiting the wider communities and the monkeys and the apes and all primates.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if it's not enough to convince you to protect primates because they're gorgeous and beautiful, they're also so incredibly important for biodiversity and conservation, and they're amazing at seed dispersal. So much
At what?
seed dispersal. So all the fruits and everything and seeds that they eat, they poop back out as they go. They are keeping things vibrant. They're keeping their ecosystems healthy. They're really, really important to have around. So, putting your money places that are encouraging that rather than taking them out of those environments is so important, because pretty much almost every primate species is seeing declines in populations. And that's not something we want, because it's got a complete knock-on effect for their entire ecosystems.
Do you have numbers on the declination?
I do, which I can actually pull up pretty quick. So just to show sort of the rate in decrease in primate populations, in 2014, about 48% of primates were vulnerable or endangered. By 2017, it rose to 60%. And in 2021, it rose to 75% with severely declining populations.
So 70% of the primates are endangered right now, at least.
And approximately 93% of primates now have declining populations.
And that's worldwide, or is that specifically for Southeast Asian countries?
That is a worldwide study.
Okay.
So yeah, it's scary. It's scary to think how many populations are declining, and also the rate of decline is wild.
Yeah, it's going like skyrocketing up. It's numbers that wake you up and should really warn the people who are also working there, policymakers, to do some change, because that's not normal. That shouldn't be the case. Like, this is only getting worse, and actually it should get better when we have these data, right?
Yeah, like primates, as I said, they're so vital. They need our protection, and there's no world in which every single year we should be seeing a greater percentage of them declining in population. That's the exact opposite direction to what we should be going in.
Yeah. Do you think we can change that?
I think we can. I think tourism plays a huge role in it. Again, focusing specifically on Southeast Asia. The biggest threats, hunting, and hunting predominantly fuels the exotic pet trade. So we do not want any pet monkeys. It fuels bushmeat and traditional medicines. So if we can try and reduce consumption and support of things like that, that will make a difference. And also deforestation and habitat loss is huge. So being more sustainable, more conscious of these things, even in our everyday life, it can make an overall difference. We can't just see those big numbers and those scary numbers and think, oh, well, then there's no way back. We've seen studies and reports of populations that have been brought back from the brink of extinction. So why can't we do that with primates as well?
That's actually good to know. We can do something, even if it's going in the wrong direction. We can still make a change and make sure that on the long term, the numbers are decreasing in the right direction, meaning the populations are not decreasing anymore, but those numbers are decreasing. Yeah, thank you so much for being part of this whole conversation. I feel like I learned so much from you. I have 9 very quick questions to end up the interview. I do this for all of my guests. These are the same questions that everybody's answering. So if you're ready to roll, we can start with that.
I'm ready.
Okay. How old are you now?
28, but I will be probably 29 by the time the podcast goes out.
How old were you the first time you traveled to another continent?
Oh, maybe I must have been around 10-ish or so when I went to Kenya. Something like that.
Okay. What's the longest time you've been away from home?
Actually, right now is the longest that I've not visited home for. I haven't lived at home I haven't lived at home long term since 2019, but this will be over a year since I've seen my mum, and that's a long time for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Would you rather see a lot of places or get to know one really well?
One really well, definitely.
Okay. Would you rather save money on accommodation or pay for a good bed?
I cannot sleep in a dorm bed. I think I need to spend a little bit of money.
Okay. What word would you teach a foreigner who wants to learn your mother tongue?
Oh, I feel like primates is a good one, as we just covered today.
Yes, definitely is. What can't you travel without?
Well, now my puppy.
Very cute. What's your favorite travel song or a song you like to listen to when you're traveling?
Oh, a favorite travel song. I feel like it changes for every trip. Every trip has a song, right? At the minute, going through Vietnam, all I'm listening to is Hot to Go.
Amazing. Okay, and last question. Why do you travel?
To see wildlife completely. If I'm going on a trip and I'm not seeing wildlife, I'm like, what? Why am I going on a trip?
Okay, amazing. That was it. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm going to also drop the information on your website in the show notes. I want to give you the space to also talk about your own social media, where people can find you. Can you explain how they can reach out to you over there?
Yeah, my most common social media use is Instagram. I'm at Connie.Needham. And that's for any short form little educational bits. At the minute, I'm highlighting all the projects that are going up on Project Wild. So it's a good way to see like a snippet of what's included there. And I'm trying to be a nice grown up and get my LinkedIn going too. So you can find me on there as well.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much.
And thank you. Thank you for having me. That was a really fun conversation. I love to talk about monkeys and apes.
Thank you.
This was Travel Devil, brought to you by me, your host, Clara Francken. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to continue the conversation or suggest any future guests, you can go to my Instagram, @Clara Francken. Take care, and I will see you next Thursday.